And now for something completely machinima.
Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke. Hello, and welcome to another installment of And Now for Something Completely Machinima. I'm joined by Phil Rice, Tracy Harwood,
Hello.
and of course, Ricky Grove. Now, this week is actually your pick, your film pick. So let's get right to it. What have you chosen for us to have a look at?
I've chosen a film that just was released not too long ago, maybe a couple weeks, called Cinematic Experience GTA by Salva Padilla. GTA's Grand Theft Auto, of course. And it's a short film that immediately reminded me, in fact, I think it's very much like, I wouldn't be surprised if this Salva Padilla saw this film and got the inspiration. But in 1927, a man named Walter Ruttmann took a 16 millimeter camera and he was a German filmmaker, and he walked all around Berlin. And he took all sorts of film, short clips of things that interested him. And the result was Berlin Symphony of a Great City, which is one of the founding early documentary films of the 20th century. And it's delicious, it's delightful. And this is essentially the same thing. Instead, rather than being shot in a real city, it's shot in a virtual city of Grand Theft Auto, which is basically Los Angeles. And what you have are primarily close-up shots with depth of field, for the most part, of various places, people, things, and moments in this city of Los Angeles, virtual city of Los Angeles in GTA. And there's no narrative. There's a fun soundtrack, sort of slow rock soundtrack. You could use any soundtrack. I think this works well because it adds to the sort of urban feel of the film. And there are many marvelous things in the film. And it isn't until a little over halfway through that you finally get a wide shot. Everything is in close-up of all of these people and places. And when you get to that wide shot, it just reminded me how effective camera distance and camera angles can be, because that wide shot of Los Angeles, the skyline of it, was just breathtaking, even though it's in a virtual game, as opposed to shot in Unreal or shot in Unity or Maya or something like that. It was just marvelous. And there were several moments in the film that were very poetic for me. There was a shot of washing on a clothesline with it flapping in the breeze. There was a hitchhiker. At one point, there was a fight between two men. There were various emergency personnel rushing, a fireman, close-up of a fireman, police officers. There was a guy in a laboratory that I thought was remarkable. These were all little poetic moments that suggested stories behind them, at least to my imagination, that made me believe what it was I was seeing, even though it was shot in a game. And the quality of rendering was certainly not super high. But I really, really enjoyed this film and was really taken by it. I didn't do a lot of background like Tracy usually does, but Salva Padilla has some other types of films that are very similar to this. And I found myself quite impressed with it, even though it was done in a traditional style machinima. and I enjoyed it. And I was really looking forward to your reactions towards the film. So, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. I think I watched it and I had a very similar reaction to you, Ricky. It's good to see these snapshots of all these different characters in this virtual city because GTA is one of these big open worlds and it's programmed to be like, as you're going through it, it's meant to feel like a real city, which means the people that you see walking around or doing things,
Right.
uh, they're acting like they're living out their lives. So this film captures some of those moments, and it's not, they're all doing different things. Um, if it all just been people running around shooting each other, that wouldn't have been interesting. But this, because
Mm,
it's a real world, it's a real city, obviously renamed for the game, but these are very relatable moments for a lot of people. Um, or even if you're not necessarily that familiar with it, they're relatable because you know that they are grounded in reality to some degree. So it kind of gives you that feel of this is a real virtual city inhabited by real people, and it kind of makes you wonder. Well, there's many other games like this as well. There's um, Red Dead Redemption, Cyberpunk, and Skyrim, and Starfield, and so many other big open world games. You kind of wonder what other videos like this could be made. It's kind of inspiring just to capture moments of lives in those other games because they'd be very different. I mean, Cyberpunk's going to be more or less the same. It's slightly more futuristic, but then you get something like um, Skyrim, where it's a fantasy setting, but the characters are still acting like they're living their lives in this fantasy world. So you could do a video like that in that game, or in Starfield, where it's up in space, and you could see characters doing space stuff, but it's still their everyday lives. I think it'd be
right.
interesting to see more videos like this. So,
Yeah, I
um,
agree.
yeah, so I
It's
really
almost like
enjoyed it.
a personal essay film,
Yeah,
which is what
and
this Walter Ruffman did in Berlin. He just walked around this city that he loved and recorded things that were interesting. Say, for example, if you did that, Damien, since you were a different kind of person, you would have different things that interested you,
yeah,
and you would film things that are different, and it would be a different. That's why it's a personal essay.
yeah.
I think it's a great idea, and I urge filmmakers who are watching this to do that.
And even if you don't feel comfortable going out to film, just sit and what people watch for a while, and you'll give you a similar taste because you're going to focus in on what interests you. Like, I don't know, maybe someone's wearing a t-shirt with a film you like on it, so you're going to notice them and see what they go to, or maybe if they walk into a shop that you like going in yourself, and you kind of wonder what are they going to buy? Is it something I would buy? Um, and well, what I found myself doing is after the pandemic and things started opening up, and I'd be sitting down watching people thinking, what were they doing when everything was closed? What did they do to entertain themselves when they couldn't go anywhere? What experiences did they have? How did they keep in contact with their friends and family? And did they stick to the rules or did they break the law and things like that? Your imagination kind of goes wild a bit. And this kind of film is along those lines. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's a great pick, Ricky.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to this that you guys have both touched on. One is the sense of choosing what is interesting, like you said. Um, one of the most interesting things that I did with my son when my son was very young, like 3, 4 years old. I had an extra Pentax digital camera, and I taught him how to use it and just gave it to him. It's his. Going through that reel later of photos he took was fascinating
I bet.
because he's a very intelligent kid. And I learned more about him from that than maybe anything else because it was a montage of what he found interesting. And yeah,
Beautiful.
this has got that element to it that it's uh, there's a million things to observe in GTA or in the world too. But yeah, it's our focus is what's interesting, what captures our attention, if you want to call it that. So
Indeed.
there's that. But what really I think puts this over the top is uh, the photographic skill that was shown here. So it's not even just shot selection, which is at least half of it, but then just beautiful shots and the very effective use of depth of field to help bring even more into focus what it is that is interesting to the person who took the picture or the camera shot. Just a masterclass in that. It's amazing to me, Salvo. I went and rewatched the film about an hour before we started recording here. He's got 2 subscribers.
Yeah.
This film has
One of them is
maybe
us.
maybe a couple dozen views at the most.
Phil, one of them is us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but clearly this is not somebody new to not just photography. It wouldn't surprise me if Salvo doesn't have some kind of background similar to Epic Spaceman, where he was a photographer of some kind, and that he brought that skill set in. But then, having done stuff in GTA, I can watch this film and I could analyze it and I could tell you how these shots were done, but I could also tell you that none of them would come naturally or easy. That there's some real craft involved here, tweaking of these shots in the Rockstar editor afterwards. That these things don't happen naturally. So it's actually a complex skill set at play here, and the fact that the channel is so new, it just to me just raises more of a sense of mystery, which maybe Tracy's going to dispel that mystery here. I don't know, but like that this from the appearance looks like someone that just came out of nowhere, but clearly they haven't been doing nothing in the meantime, So it's just extraordinary. It doesn't have a narrative, and I didn't miss it, like at all. Like a narrative would have been a disappointment.
The narrative would have been ruined it because it would have taken ambiguity out of it.
Yeah.
Because it would have told you what it was you were seeing and how you should react to it.
It would have told you the why behind why these things are interesting.
Indeed.
And to me, an enjoyment of this film was not knowing that.
Right.
And just letting it kind of wash over me almost in a, like you said, Ricky, poetic fashion. That's the experience of this film. So, I mean, it's just beautiful. There are areas where this 10-year-old game is showing its age a little bit compared to the fidelity of characters in particular that you can get from Unreal Engine now. I get it, but my goodness, gorgeous, beautiful game, and this is just a wonderful, fresh look at a city that a lot of us have spent quite a bit of time in. So
I thought so too.
Much like that film that you referenced, Ricky, must have been for people about Berlin. Mm-hmm. That even Berliners themselves probably, were moved by the experience, even though it's a city they've spent time in. So yeah, it's very special. I'm really glad that you found this and that you picked it.
Thank you.
I've probably got a little different take on this. This one is going to be quite interesting. I saw this as a slice of life video, kind of in the style of late 70s, early 80s in vibe somehow. I guess that's the game coming through, actually thinking about it. And I saw what I thought was a montage of characters just going through the daily grind in this sort of virtual world. And I suppose really initially what I thought was maybe what he's trying to do is connect the rural environment to city life. And maybe, that was grounded in the world-related storytelling. But then I realized you're not actually seeing people connect with each other in the film. They're just things that are happening. So the things that I noticed, obviously, you said the same thing. I saw, I got the sense of crime agencies doing their thing in the world. They're seeking and destroying whatever it is they're after. You've got the gang members doing their thing. You've got the first responders and the medics and even the pastors doing the cleanup job. And then you've got everybody else just trying to get on by as best they can with all this shit happening around them. That's kind of the slice of life thing that I took from it. However, it actually starts with a sound excerpt from a classic documentary, which was focused on the life of Nina Simone. And that documentary was called Nina: An Historical Perspective. And it was by a guy called Peter Broadis. It's quite clipped in this cinematic. You don't really fully hear it. But it's basically the line where she states, everybody is half dead. Everybody avoids everybody in most situations, all over the place and most of the time. And she was talking about the way people relate to one another or not, and how in her work, what she tried to do was make stronger connections between people to move them. But mostly her words from that interview really are associated with freedom and what it is to live without fear, which she described in that as a way of seeing and being in the world. Now, of course, Nina Simone was a singer who sang about love, protest, and Black empowerment. So I think it's probably worth mentioning also that one of the most famous quotes she's known for is, I live in both worlds, the black and the white world. To me, we are the most beautiful creatures in the whole world, Black people. And I mean that in every sense. Now, obviously, that's been picked up most recently in the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think there's probably a deeper level of thinking that's gone into this cinematic film that tries to capture the essence of the dark-hearted nature of the characters that are, in this GTA world. And for sure, Padilla has presented this work in a slightly different way, albeit at some level you can see a very literal context being used from the clipped quote at the beginning of that video. And of course, picking a game like GTA for reflecting the kind of sentiment of Simone's words is quite an inspired choice because it shows the interesting mix of beautiful creatures with rich characters in all their glory. Now, I thought originally the film creator, this Padilla guy, had taken the clip from a video that was released on the 10th, well, around about the 10th anniversary of Simone's death, which was April 2013. She died in April 2003. And I'll add a link to that in the show notes so you can kind of hear what it is she actually said. But I think it turns out that it isn't. It's actually come from the music's creator. And I want to mention something about the music used too, because I think there's quite an important connection here. It's actually a track called Feelings, and it's by a guy, and I'll spell it Fuxkyodi.
You can go ahead and say it.
Fuxyodi. Very appropriate. I found the piece actually with lyrics which I'll share. But it was actually only quite recently released. The cinematic doesn't have lyrics, so I'm not too sure where he's got the soundtrack from. He's either edited out the lyrics or he's got a connection with the musician. And obviously that music hasn't also got masses of following as far as I can tell, but it's a perfect selection for the film. And I definitely feel it's they complement each other very well. The cinematic is certainly a much better video than the image that the music's creator has got on his video of the music. He's actually a rap artist. And whilst I know I shouldn't judge a book by its cover, I'd say looking at it, it definitely seems that GTA is a real place for some of the live recordings that he's put up on his channel. Anyway, the cinematic itself, I think, is quite well. I mean, you said it. It's well edited. There are some great game excerpt selections in it that actually reminded me of a real life film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's only recently come out. It features Sean Penn, Ty Sheridan, Mike Tyson, and it's called Ashphalt City or Black Flies. And it's very much a portrayal of sort of a slice of life video, if you like, of a paramedic set in New York on a night stint. So it's not LA, but it's kind of got a Los Santos sort of vibe. It's violent beyond belief. Um, but then I wondered why on earth did it make me think of that film? Because, there's obviously a dialogue in that film. There is violence that you see, there is none that you see in this cinematic, but it's there. You just don't see it. Um, and I realized it's because what you've got in the real life film is the showing of it, or at least the aftermath and the cleanup bit. Um, but the cinematic, if you like, is the in-between bit of that story. It's the depth of character formation, or the start of the depth of character formation that is missing from the characters in that film. And yet the two of them probably make a really good pairing, I would have thought. Um, and then I thought, well, we've seen these kind of in-between story components in a film, um, in a short, in some of the other films that we've reviewed fairly recently. You remember the one with the two characters on the train that's really short? Was it made in Sims, Phil? I think it
Yeah,
was one.
Sims one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really
After the robbery, I think it was called.
something like that, where you saw no action whatsoever, and yet you got a real sense of something terrible had happened there. And similarly, you kind of got a sense of something more in that, there's ones about the toxic relationships that we reviewed a couple of weeks back. Also set in Grand Theft Auto, and I think one of them had a sort of a cyberpunky type feel to it. So you kind of got the sense that these games can do everything but the violence really well in some respect. But anyway, it just made me think of that film that I'd seen that just was a bit more mainstream, which was a slice of life film of the sort you don't see very often. I could actually find nothing about this creator other than the fact that looking at the profile of the stuff that I did manage to find with his name on it and some connection to the type of music that he was listening to that's exemplified in this short. I think he's probably a French student, and obviously one with an interest in rap. That's be the only conclusion I could draw from this. I think the only real criticism I have basically of it is that I would always encourage the creator to include more information about the works of others that he's used, such as the music and the voice clip. And that's probably a comment I would also make to the musician too, because that clip from Nina Simone's interview also wasn't referenced in his work either. So that would be my overarching comment. If this is a world he's going to start to create some, work in, then he needs to have due respect for the work of others. So I would definitely pick him up on that. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It was a really interesting film to sort of think about, and just simply because of that very first sort of couple of seconds and quote, that sent me off on a completely different path to where you went, Ricky, with it. Because it never even crossed my mind to look at it in terms of more avant-garde filmmaking processes. But there's probably a connection there as well. So there you go. That's my thoughts.
Well, it's interesting that we've all got very different takes on this one film, which is part of the fun of making this show, isn't it? We all look at films differently. But yeah, it sounds
I just
like
want to add one more honorable mention to the clothesline scene that Ricky had mentioned very briefly. That Ricky, for you,
into the meaning of the film.
Ricky, for you, the wide shot is what took your breath away. For me, it was the clothes on the clothesline. The way that they blew, I just found myself just surprised, like, wow, this is from that game engine. I mean, just beautifully done. Like I looked at it in terms of like Damien and I would. It's like, oh my gosh, can you imagine how hard that would be to do an iClone? Just hang some clothes on a line and let the wind blow them beautifully. It's like, holy cow. And this engine just does it. So yeah.
My association, although you're right. The Nina Simone quote was there at the beginning, and I remember it. It didn't impact me the same way it did you, Tracy. My connection was with the Walter Ruttmann film, the Berlin Symphony of a City, that if you go back and you and Google that and watch a bit of it on YouTube, you'll see how similar those things are. And so my connection immediately went into that and all of the meanings that were associated with that. So it's fascinating to see a film that allows such a variety of interpretations, and that just makes it even better.
Yes, I agree with
But
you.
I want to bring up something. I want to bring up something that came to my mind after watching Damien's At film. Thank you, Phil. Shot inside of originally Maya and then ported into Unreal. That is sort of the modern real-time cinema that we've been covering quite a bit, versus the traditional machinima, which was shot inside of a game engine. One of the things that has always appealed to me about that traditional machinima is the fact that that scene with the clothesline, you pointed that out, where the clothes were in the wind. You could do that in Unreal. You could make it look absolutely gorgeous in Unreal, but the level of work involved in making that happen would be staggering. Maybe not for a super pro, but it would be hard. The thing that always has interested me and I've always been attracted to is the ease, the simpleness of going into a virtual world and making a movie inside a virtual world. The crudity of that is what I found interesting. You know what I mean? Now we're looking at films that become increasingly more like professional level films, which is what traditional machinima was kind of rebelling against in the first place. Hugh Hancock was saying, I don't have the budget to be able to go and shoot this massively huge film, but I can do it inside of machinima. And all of the audiences who were watching machinima accepted that. There only really have been a handful of traditional machinima shot inside of game engines that have the level of rendering and beauty that we see on almost every Unreal film. And although I like the Unreal films and I find them interesting, they more and more lead towards the sensibility of a modern Pixar, Disney, DreamWorks type of film. And I'm uninterested in that, frankly. I mean, I can admire them, I can talk about them, I can recommend them, but what I really like is those scrappy filmmakers who got inside of a game engine and suddenly got an interesting idea from a character or a situation and made a film inside of it. French Democracy, which was a huge hit in the machinima world, traditional machinima world. If you look at it from a professional point of view, it's crap. It's absolute crap. But I love that film. I love it because of its context, its political context, and the very fact that it's crude is what makes me enjoy it. So I'm interested in hearing what your ideas about traditional machinima inside of a game engine versus this modern moving towards professional level Unreal Engine type of, I don't even call it machinima. It's not machinima. It's real-time filmmaking is what it is. So I'm interested in your observations and thoughts about what I've said and also the difference between those two things.
Well, okay, so the technological landscape out of which machinima emerged, and in that rebellious state of mind, like you said, Ricky, had a lot to do with resources, computing resources, hardware resources, the software resources, just plumb not being available or feasible for a no budget or low budget indie creator. The machinima emerged at a time when Pixar was rendering their films, it was a server farm, and still it would sometimes take hours and hours and hours just to render a single frame of something like Toy Story, for example. And that just wasn't feasible. So that's the part of machinima saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead, that Hugh trumpeted. That's the part that most people remember. And well, that whole picture has changed now, right? All those tools are within reach. Even if you don't go the iClone route, which can get expensive when you've got the software itself and the plugins and then content and all of that, and it can rack up a bit of a bill. But if somebody just wanted to go in there and do it all in Unreal Engine or even Unity for that matter, there's ways to do it with no monetary investment. You still got to have a computer to run it, of course, but I think those along with blazing fast, high-speed internet, which negates the download time problem that we had. Machinima emerged at a time when streaming video wasn't even a thing at all in any context. Nobody was doing streaming video. Like, it didn't exist. YouTube didn't come around to what, 2005? Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. But I think what it's easy to forget is that wasn't all that the machinima pioneers like Hugh were standing up and saying no to. It wasn't just about technological expediency. That was part of it. But I think a case could be made, and we'll never know, but I think a case could be made that if Hugh, God rest his soul, if he were still around today, I think part of him would still be attracted to, Hugh, as he went along, he had more and more doubts about whether or not machinima was a good platform for him because of intellectual property issues primarily. That basically, I'm going to invest all my work and time into this thing that ultimately then someone else is going to be able to tell me whether or not I can submit it to a film festival or make it more widely available or sell it or whatever. So he openly questioned a lot of that stuff and invest a lot of time and research into alternatives to get free of that kind of webbing of IP problems that happen with machinima. But I think, he also he really had that rebel attitude. He liked kind of bucking the system, I don't know if those two things would have ever been able to be fully resolved, that rebellious spirit combined with, I need to eat, So
right.
I think machinima of the distinction that you're making, Ricky, still has an appeal. But it's not framed in the same way as it was when machinima got started. When machinima got started, you didn't have the option to craft with readily available resources, craft and render in real time in any other way. It just wasn't there yet, So, but I think that there's an element to machinima that I think kind of ties into the same spirit of almost like guerrilla filmmaking, I think is the right term, right?
Yeah.
Or the avant-garde, frankly, for that matter, where it's there's challenges with that, even in real world filmmaking, the whole guerrilla filmmaking thing now. And maybe this was this way back then too, but nowadays you can't do anything. You can't go anywhere without a permit. You have to have basically governing authority permission to even take pictures somewhere, and it's an oppressive environment for someone who just wants to go out and make a film and not worry about that stuff. You can't. You get arrested, So, but there's still that sense, and so in machinima you can still do that. Now you have to go into it with your eyes wide open about what that if you go into a Grand Theft Auto 5 or soon Grand Theft Auto 6 and make a film, you have to kind of have in your head the understanding that this will never be fully mine. And maybe that's okay, you know? Maybe ownership isn't all it's cracked up to be. You know, it's certainly not everything. I mean, I've been one of the loudest mouths about IP issues around video games forever, and yet I'm working on a traditional machinima in a video game right now, like right now. So it's not everything, and I won't own it. You know, like I'll be able to put it on my YouTube channel, but you know, but there was something that drew me to for this one that I'm working on now, and for several that I've released this year that are in game engines. That there's still something that draws me to that environment, and it's not just that it's easier. That's part of it. The ease of just being able to open up the virtual world of Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto, or you know, for people who know their way around Second Life, I'm sure that's part of the draw too. Is you just go in there and this whole world is just there, and it's been built by other people, and so there's unpredictability, and you're not sure what to expect around the corner and all of that.
Right,
you know?
right.
And then if it's a game and a well-made game, then it's even more amazing because they've programmed the people to live out lives essentially. You know, I mean, some of the character maybe we've talked about it on the show. There's an NPC routine in Grand Theft Auto 5 where a dog daily goes to visit the grave site of its owner and sits there at the grave, and then at a certain time of day goes home. These game worlds are full of stuff like that are
amazing.
It's just a crazy detail.
Amazing.
You know?
Yeah.
There's a cave in Red Dead Redemption 2 that I don't know if you ever encounter it in the full playthrough of Arthur's story in the game, but there's a cave that you cannot get to. You can't climb to it. There's just no way up there, but there's a guy up there, some miner, like with the pickaxe and everything, and he's batshit crazy and just ranting, and just, I mean, he's like having some kind of bipolar freak out or something. He's just nuts. And there's extensive dialogue you can have with him. Nothing can really come of it. I mean, you can cheat your way up and get up there, and he's up there, and there's a little campfire that you can never see from the ground. Like he's holed up there, this guy. It's just made up. And it's not even part of the main plot of the story. You know, these game worlds are full of stuff like that. And it's always been, I remember, Ricky, when Grand Theft Auto 4 first came out, and you and I spent several sessions in multiplayer just riding around on a motorcycle.
I know.
Just seeing what we could see. No agenda. We weren't out there to shoot anybody. We just wanted to see what's up. We ended up finding this whole like homeless encampment that was in the abandoned subway tunnels.
Yeah.
Guys around a burning barrel warming their hands and muttering to themselves and all. I mean, it was just fascinating.
I remember your reaction to that too.
It was just amazing. So, you know, that to me, that's something Unreal Engine, there's just no such thing as that. That doesn't exist in Unreal.
And it makes a difference
in the unpredictable, you know?
Yeah, it also affects the way the filmmakers get inspired to tell stories.
Right.
The story that in an AT-AT is a story that he's taken from a feature film.
Yeah.
The idea from that. Whereas the story in the GTA cinematic experience was taken from this guy's walking around and seeing things and responding to them in a different way.
Yeah.
Personally, I prefer that.
Yeah.
As opposed to traditional. And I think it's a richer way of finding things to respond to in game worlds like that. I mean, when you told me about that batshit crazy guy, immediately story ideas came into my head. So what are you going to do with Star Trek? You're going to do the same thing that everybody else does. Oh, Jabba the Hutt. Yeah, he's gonna leer at some girls, and yeah, I'll make a movie out of that. The fuck is that?
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
interestingly, some of the newer Star Wars IP where they stay completely away from the whole Skywalker storyline, those people are finding the most interesting,
Hmm.
where it's or exploring like Damien's doing exploring this novel that has never seen the big screen at all. And it has it's not related to what's already been made as movies. It's something different. So yeah, even within the context of the Star Wars universe, that newness. I imagine that some of these open world Star Wars games are probably pretty interesting in terms of these
I'll bet.
unexpected characters and whatnot. I always wished that Mass Effect was a little bit more that type of open world
Yeah.
instead of a very linear, mostly linear narrative that you were to follow. Because the worlds that they built there, that big station that was kind of a central thing in the early Mass Effect games, just fascinating ideas, but there wasn't any way to really explore it in a GTA like way.
GTA like way,
So
right?
yeah, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I rambled myself way off into a corner there, but
A good
yeah,
corner
I think
though.
I think the conversation about what what propelled people towards machinima has changed, but there's still something to be attracted to there, and there's still ground to be plowed there, and things to be discovered and reacted to and whatnot. And I hope that tradition continues. That as long as there are companies making games like Cyberpunk and the GTA series, and Red Dead Redemption, and there's probably numerous ones out there. I don't know how open world Fallout is, but Fallout is a really interesting game world idea, but I haven't played it enough to know if it has those hidden gems like we're talking about, Ricky, or if it's just a Mass Effect like linear
Okay.
storyline. I have no
Yeah, right.
idea.
Bethesda games are fairly open world.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
I'm
encouraging. I
yeah,
mean,
I'm not too
people, because
familiar
that
with
game's very
Fallout.
popular. There's a lot of interest in those worlds. I'm assuming that there's some elements of that in Starfield, for example. I
Yeah.
don't know from experience, but I would assume so. It sure looks like it. And yeah, there's a lot of very fertile ground there for true machinima.
mm,
So I hope we see more of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to sort of give you my take on it, really? I think,
Sure.
I mean, Phil said a lot of things I would have picked up on. I think we are in a time of different tools, and also a time when people in different creative industries like the film world are looking at other industries that they perceive to be successful engaging the same kind of target audiences they might be wanting to engage with, but using a different type of tool set. So you've kind of got the ludic world of the games versus the film world. And so you've got an engine like Unreal, which started off as Unreal Tournament with Matinee embedded within a game world. And what they've basically done is, so well, let's make this even more open for people by extracting that tool set and making that just sort of a standalone, but it's still rooted in the game world, the world of game mechanics, if you like. It's just that now what they're trying to figure out is how do you get game worlds into their tool set, or how do you transcend that link between the film and the game worlds? And that's basically why they're going after the film industry at the moment, because they are very aware of how a lot of these film companies are seeing that they can find a new life for their assets if they turn them into some kind of interactive experience, which is what they're trying to do with Unreal. So I think you've kind of, you know, I think you're seeing the sort of the cusp of the emergence of new types of ludic environments using worlds such as Unreal Engine. And what you've got is basically a clean slate type um, approach with this tool set, where anybody can port in the assets that they would like, and create a game for one thing, because you can create game experiences in Unreal Engine. That's what Unreal Engine Fortnite is all about, platform for game stuff, of which there's some really interesting things coming out. We're going to be talking about one next week in the news episode, in fact. Um, but what they're saying is it was hard back in the early days to use games as creative platforms, whereas let's make it easier for people. That's what Matinee was. So I think what they've tried to do is harness how people want to reuse IP, but just make it easier for them to do it. And then you've got the sudden realization that actually you can do other stuff with this as well. Let's use it for just creating real time stuff in the cheapest kind of way possible. And that's what we've been going through the last couple of years, people sort of playing around with the tool set, making some pretty high quality looking content, but without putting into it the ludic qualities that you would expect from the game-based machinima. But they are linked. I do see them as being linked. I do see that kind of, that ludic space being connected to the Unreal space, if that makes sense. Because of that.
If they're connected as a concept, but in terms of practical filmmaking,
no,
it's
well,
useless,
I agree.
because
Yes.
what you're doing in Unreal Engine is starting from scratch.
Yes.
And all of those possible things that Phil was talking about, the ranting guy,
yes,
the
exactly.
washing on the line, all of that's just gone. You can't use any of that. And that was the stuff that interested me in traditional machinima.
Yes, I can understand that. Yeah, I can definitely understand it. But I think what they've done is allowed for a much bigger ecosystem to become involved in the process. So at an indie level, at a single creator level, where you needed all that sort of pre-developed content in order to sort of create something that was kind of fun and interesting. With the sort of with the Unreal world that I'm talking about, that ecosystem comprises of the mod creators, the asset creators, the the mocap folks, the re-illusion folks. They've got a whole kind of ecosystem of tool sets, if you like, that kind of expand that environment, which means in theory you can at least create relatively easily the sorts of content that you might need to be inspired from a game world at an earlier time. So that's how I kind of see it, connected and different, if you like. It's not
I see it. I see your point, but the thing I'm trying to point out is that in order to be able to do what you're saying in Unreal, take that ludic idea and put it into an Unreal with higher, you have to develop a range of skills that take so much time that it takes away from what the original idea of the machinima was about, which is get some tools, you can learn fairly quickly, do some captures, make a movie.
Yeah.
That was the whole fun of it. And that everybody was around that idea of, sure, it was crude. Maybe the faces weren't rendered as well as they could be in Unreal, but nobody cared about that because you were making these. I mean, red versus blue is a perfect example of that, although it's not my favorite type of machinima. It's so simple to make, and yet they emphasize the writing, the craziness, the Samuel Beckett life aspect of war. Now let's just say that the creators of that were in the present day, and they go, well, yeah, let's do that in Unreal. Well, it would take them month after month after month to try to learn all of the various skill sets in order to create the characters, create the environment, import them into Unreal, then learn inside of Unreal how to animate them and run the cinematic. And the whole idea of being able to respond spontaneously to a situation is gone.
Yes,
and what you have is a more traditional professional level of animation and
But I don't think
cinema.
the vision was ever to do what you've just described. I think the vision was always to think about how films could be made into ludic experiences. And through that process, then content could be created. That's what I always thought the vision was for Unreal Engine. And it's not what it is at the moment. And that's what you're describing. That's what we're seeing. That's what we've observed. We've observed people using it in ways that it wasn't anticipated to be used for. But I never saw it as being what it is currently, shall we say. That's never how I saw it. I think we are probably a few years away from how the vision of it was imagined, which is that the films become games. And
All right. Well,
and
let's check in 2 years, okay?
yeah, why not?
And we'll see how whether
10p
Unreal
bet.
is involved into a game-based system. We'll see. But fascinating
No,
ideas as
a
always.
film-inspired games, a ludic system.
I got it.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this for a while as well, actually, with Heir to the Empire, because at the end of the book, there's this huge space battle, hundreds of ships, and in iClone, when I started this project, I never expected to get to the end of this book, so I didn't really think about it. So I established a visual style by animating everything in iClone, because when there were battles, they were very small scale things, very easy to animate. And I've been thinking, there is this temptation. I'm not going to do it because I've already established the visual style for the series, and I don't want to go backwards. But there is a Star Wars video game called Empire at War, and it's a strategy game. It's got space battles and ground battles, and it would be so easy for me to just place all the ships, have them fight out in a multiplayer battle, and there's even a cinematic mode. You press space bar, and the interface disappears, and the camera kind of goes down, and it automatically cuts between different things. And I don't have to worry about animating every single laser blast that's going to appear on screen and stuff like that. So that there's that kind of temptation there just because it's so much easier. On the other hand, I kind of like the challenge of doing it all manually. But I've just been thinking about how my approach is different now compared to, if I was making this film 10 years ago, I would have used the game. I would never have thought about using iClone for a battle. And doing these backgrounds to the videos, this is the closest to machinima in the traditional sense I've made for quite a while, because I pick a game and I'll just go in and get some footage, still camera, but just something I could use as the background. And this particular shot is from Dune: Spice Wars, which again is another strategy game, not something you'd expect to be used for machinima, really, because it's not really designed for that. But I've found that there's an option to turn the interface off. So you've got none of that there. You just got the desert, and there's things flying around in the background. And that's perfect for what I wanted as the background. And making these, I kind of miss those old days of loading up a game and going in and finding things to shoot. Or with Heir to the Empire, I have to plan everything. There's no happy accidents. There's no, oh, that's happening. I'm going to quickly point the camera that way to capture it and see how I can work it in. But with a game, that stuff happens all the time. Even if you're planning things fairly meticulously, things are going to happen that you don't expect. And sometimes they can be really helpful for you. Sometimes they're not. And you have to work around it. Like the Sims characters, they're walking around and they've got these really exaggerated movements. Sometimes that worked for your film, and sometimes it will ruin the shot, and you have to set it up and do it again. But that's part of the fun of doing it, is that you don't know quite how it's going to turn out. And to do a big budget comparison of that, Dune Part 2, the shot at the scene at the beginning when they're out in the desert and the Harkonnens come down and they're hunting them. When they wrote the script, there was no plan for an eclipse in it. That was never planned. But when they worked out the filming schedule and they realized there was going to be an eclipse as they were doing that scene, they decided to make sure they shot that eclipse as it was happening and incorporated it into the scene to give it that red light. But that was never
Lovely.
planned. That was just
It's a great
a happy
idea.
accident. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what, as I've been listening to you guys talking about it, I was thinking, in iClone or Unreal, you're never going to get that. I know that's a live action film, but that kind of thing will not
True.
happen in
Yeah.
in iClone or Unreal. You have to make it happen. If you want that clipped, you've got to do it. Whereas if you were doing it in a game and they have a sky that changes, you can get things like that happening, and then you can decide if you want to incorporate it or not. And obviously with Dune, they did. And I admire that kind of
That's
creativity,
fascinating.
working around
Yeah.
things that happen.
Yeah. I think finally what it comes down for me is the difference between amateur sensibility and pro sensibility. The pro sensibility is something that I just don't find myself that interested in because it works on traditional and somewhat stereotyped views of story and character and all of that. And that's fine. I mean, I love Dune 2. But in terms of machinima, I much prefer the amateur, no commerce idea of approach. I think it allows for more creativity and it has more variety. And as the difference between the AT-AT film and our cinematic experience shows that they also have different impacts on the viewer. And I prefer the cinematic impacts GTA by Salva Padilla. And it's just a matter of preference. But thank you for sharing your ideas about all of those things. And because it was on my mind, and the first thing I thought was, well, what are my pals going to say about it?
Well,
You always have something to say.
I'm glad you brought it up because it's been on my mind from a different perspective, like I just said. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it.
Right.
Do you know what? I think it's something we'll come back to again and again because there is definitely this move to merge films into games somehow and vice versa. And I you got to ask the question why they want to do that.
Yeah.
And it's all because of that whole sort of thing about games being very successful, much more fun, much more engaging, and the fact that you can kind of, lose yourself in the ludic quality of that kind of experience than you can in a sort of, spectator situation where you're sat back and watching a film. So I think this is something that we will touch on a lot in the coming time.
I hope so.
All right.
So I think that wraps it up for this week. Thank you to my co-hosts, Tracy, Ricky, and Phil.
Welcome.
If you've got anything to talk about the film we talked about, or if you got anything to say about traditional machinima versus the the iClone Unreal approach, please let us know at talk@completemachinima.com, and we will see you all next week. Take care. And,
Bye.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.